Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to A Cup of Hope with Hope Against Trafficking and Michigan Abolitionist Project. Today's episode is called Labor Trafficking, a Multi-Faceted Approach. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to our panel by typing your questions into the Facebook Live event on either Hope Against Trafficking or the Michigan Abolitionist Facebook page or through Hope Against Trafficking's YouTube page. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the session. Today, we're going to explore and learn more about labor trafficking, how the Department of Labor plays a role, and ways we as a community can engage in the anti-labor trafficking efforts. Please welcome today's panelists, Emily Johnson, Program Coordinator at Michigan Abolitionist Project, Hannah McPeak, Hope Against Trafficking, and our special and incredible guest panelist, Jacob Swear. He's the Community Outreach and Planning Specialist with the U.S. Department of Labor. All right. Welcome.
Pleased to be here.
Thanks for joining us, Jacob.
Oh, you know what? Can I take a minute? I just want to share a little bit more details about Jacob because he's done some incredible work. And so I want to read a little bit of his bio, if that's okay, just to kick things off. Jacob, you've been a Community Outreach and Planning Specialist for the U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division since 2018. And in that role, he educates and provides technical assistance to workers, employers, contracting agencies, advocates, and other stakeholders to better understand workers' rights and reach vulnerable, underserved communities. When not doing outreach, he spends lots of time researching and planning strategic, data-driven enforcement efforts. Prior to his current position, Jacob spent 8 years as an investigator with Wage and Hour Division's Grand Rapids District Office, enforcing a variety of federal labor laws, including the prevailing wage protections of the Davis-Bacon Act. Thank you for the work that you do. Ooh, you know what? We're going to bring in an additional guest here, Heather, or panelist, one of our amazing panelists, actually, Heather McGannon with Michigan Abolitionist Project. You're a program coordinator with them, and welcome. I'm glad that technology has allowed you to join us.
We're going to hope. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yes, we've had some technical difficulties, so, but I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to Emily, Heather, and Jacob, and we'll begin our incredible and awesome discussion.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Heather, you're sounding looking better already.
Okay, good. Oh, man.
So, Jacob, it sounds like you do some really important stuff. That was a mouthful, what Hannah just said. Do you want to maybe unpack that a little bit? Tell us about your work and your job and what you do in your specific position.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate being here today to talk about, the important efforts that we're all doing in the community to combat labor trafficking. My role as a community outreach specialist is ensuring that workers have the information that they need to assert their rights under U.S. law. I've been doing that about 3.5 years. So really connecting with groups in our community to amplify that message is the big part of my role. That data-driven strategic enforcement that was mentioned, that's a real mouthful. Really, that comes down to using our limited resources most effectively to enforce U.S. laws where workers need them most in low-wage, vulnerable communities. So we plan and research for those activities every year. And so I do about half of my time doing outreach and presentations and trainings, and the other half involved in that planning and enforcement effort. And then prior to that, I was an investigator for about 8 years, enforcing some of these basic protections that are afforded to workers. So that was a very rewarding experience, but I'm glad to be in this role now, talking to folks like you all. So that's really been my experience with the Department of Labor thus far.
That's awesome. You're an advocate in many ways. for all these workers. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Heather, yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh yeah. Yep. So can you share a little bit with how you got involved with talking about labor trafficking and even maybe a little bit about I know that you're a part of the C Impact group over here on the west side.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I think I'll step back for a minute and talk about, labor trafficking in general. From our perspective, somebody is trafficked when they're providing their labor or services to an employer under threat or serious harm to themselves or another person. Any scheme or plan that places that victim in fear of serious harm, or that they're being abused, or even just threatened abuse if they participate in an investigation of ours or another legal process. So those are, that's the context for trafficking. And we see those, vulnerabilities playing out in a lot of ways, primarily in non-English speaking immigrants, folks that are fearful, isolated from law enforcement, predominantly women and children of color, average ages from, 16 to 25, and generally folks that are not identifying themselves as victims because they, believe and hope that promises made to them, will be kept, things will get better, and, that they're not, that they're somehow to blame for the situation they're in. We see workers who have their identification documents, visa documents withheld from them. Folks with little to no pocket money because the trafficker controls the resources that are available to them or that they have. And so it's really in that context that we talk about wage and hours role. We ensure that workers here in the States are paid according to U.S. law. We make sure that workers get the pay that they're rightfully owed. And we do that through the enforcement of laws like minimum wage, overtime, medical leave, ensuring employees are free from retaliation. And those protections kind of create a basic, workplace protection set for workers, regardless of why they're here or their immigration status, and really help safeguard against some of those worst forms of exploitation like labor trafficking. So we target low wage industries where trafficking can be most prevalent. We have experience working with vulnerable workers and immigrant communities using a variety of languages. Some of that exploitation we see happening in construction, apparel manufacturing, and agriculture, restaurants, direct care work, and hospitality like hotels, just to kind of name a few. And so we use that familiarity with industries, business practices, and trends, to identify where potential trafficking is highest. And I mean, a few other things as well. We ensure our investigators are trained on how to identify trafficking. And then, as you mentioned, Heather, we participate in local human trafficking or labor trafficking task forces, and with groups that are interested in advancing workplace protections afforded to U.S. workers. So that's a mouthful, but that's really how Wage and Hour Division sees their role in this space.
Yeah, that's awesome. The first time that I heard someone talk about you being on the labor impact group, it was kind of one of those things that was like a light bulb. Like I had never thought about Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division being I think just being a part of labor trafficking. But as soon as I heard about your job and what it is that you guys do, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. That I mean, you guys play a big role in the grand scheme of understanding human trafficking, spotting it, and helping to prevent it. And so I'm excited that you're on here so that other people can see that. And we kind of titled this one, I think, looking at labor trafficking from a different angle or a different perspective. And because it's just like, oh yeah, Department of Labor, wage and hour, right? That makes a lot of sense. Like, you guys have play a big part in this, and I'm so grateful that you guys exist, and that you have a heart and a passion to for the work that you guys are doing. So thanks for explaining all of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's noteworthy that it was a light bulb. And I think part of our process, part of our efforts here are, reintroducing, if you didn't know about it, or introducing or reintroducing the wage and hour division as a trusted resource to workers, advocates, employers, unions, and folks like you all, to make sure, people know, workers know that we're here as a resource.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So can you share a little bit about how does an investigation start? What is the investigative process? Just give us more of an understanding of what it actually looks like. Feet to the ground.
That's a good question. So investigations are really the foundation of what we do at Wage and Hour. I mean, I complement that with outreach efforts, but our investigators are foundational to what we do. An investigation starts either announced or unannounced, based on the allegation or the particular industry that we're going to be involved in. An on-site visit to an employer starts with investigators trying to determine what laws apply to that employer. And really, we begin to verify how workers are paid, making sure that they're employed properly under the law. If they have minors under the age of 18, we're verifying that they're not involved in hazardous occupations or working outside of the hours that they're restricted to. We look at payroll and timekeeping records. We take notes, we make copies, and we conduct interviews then with employees that are confidential, to ensure that what we're seeing, to verify what we're seeing from that record review. And then really, after all that fact finding is complete, the investigator will meet with the employer, discuss any findings or violations, and really commit that employer to corrective actions if violations have been found. Those remedies can include back wages computed, if there's been minimum wage or overtime violations, for example. They'll set that employer up on a timeline to make sure that those wages are paid. There's also the possibility of penalties that can be assessed, or other potential remedies that would be due workers in the event that there were wage issues. And really, it's through that investigative process that our staff can identify situations where workers may be intimidated, threatened, coerced, and trafficked. And really, in those cases where we're seeing evidence of that, we're making appropriate referrals to agencies, and connecting those workers with resources within the community.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Are you able to give any examples of maybe what that looks like?
What violations we see, or
Sure. I mean, like what kind of a tip might you get, or what is, how would you, I
mean, so we start investigations with tips or complaints. We encourage folks to call our toll-free hotline, 1-866-4-US-WAGE. We have many Spanish-speaking staffers that handle those calls, and folks with other language capabilities. We have translation services if necessary. Those calls are confidential. And so it can begin with just really a counseling session on what your rights as a worker are under U.S. law. It doesn't have to amount to a complaint if the employee or the worker chooses not to. And in the event that they're still uncomfortable, they can have a third party, an advocate, their parents, file a complaint on their behalf. In most offices like mine, there are, other community outreach representatives like myself engaging with folks in the community. So we're always a resource as well to take those complaints or tips. And then we begin that investigation process as we talked about. Really we see a variety of outcomes there, from employers being compliant and following the law as they should, to workers who've been housed in unsafe, unsanitary conditions. We see workers not paid the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. We see workers that are forced to pay recruitment fees for job opportunities and then retaliated against if they raise their voice. So we see a host of outcomes and are prepared for all of those.
Great, thanks. That's helpful to kind of understand, I guess, a little bit what those tips maybe are and what people are calling about. So so I guess one thing that's been on my mind, just especially for us in West Michigan, but really Michigan in general, as we're kind of in the middle of summer growing and some harvesting season. We've got a lot of blueberries started this week. Cherries have been going. So we have a lot of guest workers here on H-2A visas.
Yeah.
Are there any specific things that farm owners have to agree to when it comes to wages and hours?
Yeah, there's a host of things that they have to commit themselves to if they're going to bring guest workers into our country. They're required to recruit and offer jobs to U.S. workers prior to offering them to a visa worker. They're prevented from firing U.S. workers to fill those jobs with visa workers. They have to pay a wage rate of $15.37 per hour for all the hours that they work, at least, and that's in the state of Michigan. They have to disclose in writing all the terms and conditions of employment, including the start and end dates that somebody's going to be here in the country, a schedule of their hours, the crops that they're working on, the required tools that they need, any deductions that they'll make. They have to guarantee a set number of hours at least under that contract. They have to provide safe transportation to the U.S. and then every day to and from the job location. They have to provide safe and sanitary housing. They have to pay for expenses associated with the work, such as the visa costs, inbound and outbound transportation to and from that job opportunity. So, and growers getting involved in the H-2A program have no small task. And frankly, there are many protections afforded to those visa guest workers and the U.S. workers that are performing similar work.
Okay. That's awesome. Great to know. Yes, that's a large process.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people are aware of the actual that program and how it all works. And so thank you.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, of course.
So what is the scope of exploitation in Michigan? Like you mentioned, we were just talking about agriculture with these visas. How often is it that you would see, that all those terms and conditions are not met and that you would have to, and like, what are some of those industries that are really struggling to commit to all that in Michigan?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Emily. I think so. Guest workers principally fall under two programs, the H-2B, which is hospitality, primarily in Michigan hospitality, but service-oriented work that's non-agriculture. Folks get brought under in landscaping firms, hospitality firms, in tourist-heavy towns along the lakeshore frequently, and then in agriculture in the H-2A program. And so for those guest worker programs, we see violations of those provisions that I outlined. And, any of those can be potential indicators for trafficking, in addition to instances where employers or labor contractors are keeping their visa or ID documents, limiting their mobility, housing in unsafe conditions, making them work in conditions that are not agreed to in that contract that we talked about, and we see those type of violations, throughout those industries, in agriculture and hospitality, within landscaping, within that guest worker context. But, frankly, it's not restricted to that. We see that in non-H program employment, in employment with domestic workers as well. So, I don't know. I can't really comment on the scope, but I think that gives you a little indication to what our experience is. It happens in those guest worker programs and beyond. And our job really is just to ensure that all workers here, regardless of their status, of whether they're on a visa, whether they're here for whatever reason, are afforded those same protections.
So a lot of those communities is where you focus your community outreach, those tourist areas.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Makes me want to just shout on a mountaintop to everybody, hey, you guys are here. So now, once you guys have done the investigations, what happens after? If the case is found that they're going against some of the wage and hour stuff.
Yeah, there's a variety of outcomes in the context of potential trafficking. We're referring those cases to our OIG counterparts. The U.S. Department of Labor has an Office of Inspector General that handles criminal complaints that occasionally include trafficking. The Department of Justice also gets involved through referrals from our office, local law enforcement, or we make referrals to, appropriate victim service organizations as well. And in addition to handling our own component of the wage violations associated with potential trafficking cases. For non-trafficking case outcomes, we bring the employer into compliance. We ensure that they're following the law. We compute those back wages. We assess penalties if necessary. And, our goal of that is to ensure workers are paid properly and get that employer into future compliance so they're following the law moving forward.
Nice. Sorry, I'm taking some notes.
That's all right. There's the classic lag time in the virtual world. So audience out there, don't mind our awkward pauses.
Yeah. Hey, they should be taking some notes too. How about that? So tell us more about that prevention piece. So the community outreach that you do, you mentioned that you do trainings. Are there certain awareness materials that you pass out, or what entail?
Our interest is to connect with as many organizations as stakeholders that are interested in amplifying U.S. worker protections as possible, to ensure
ask
workers
for you to come.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Give me a call. I'll
It's not mandatory for any of these business owners and employers that they receive some
No,
kind
I
of?
mean, so in the context of an investigation,
Yeah.
they have obligations that they have to adhere to. You know, if we're visiting them to ensure that they're compliant with U.S. law, there's mandatory corrective actions associated with that. But in terms of our outreach, that's about, connecting with interested
Mhm.
stakeholders, connecting with groups that not only want to amplify worker protections, but also ensure that employers have the resources they need to pay people properly and follow the law, administer medical leave, etc. So we're looking, to coordinate and connect with any group that's interested in that. And that's the role of my position throughout the country. We have close to 70 community outreach specialists. Most offices have one. We have a directory to that online, so it encourage you folks out there, workers as well, if you want to just connect confidentially with a community outreach specialist, just Google community outreach specialist, U.S. Department of Labor, wage and hour, and you can connect to that directory. We have a slew of resources that talk about protections under U.S. law afforded to guest workers, afforded to U.S. workers that should have been offered those jobs, for employees on how to properly assert their rights under the Family Medical Leave Act. Um, those resources come in a variety of languages: Spanish, Polish, Creole, Italian,
Mhm.
all sorts of ways to connect to workers. And we're always looking for commentary or of how we can do better too. So I'd encourage folks out there, whether you're an advocate organization or a worker, to let me know or let my office know how we can reach you more effectively.
Thanks for sharing that. Man, you guys have your hands in a lot. I just
Yeah.
all of that. I mean, it feels like you share one thing and then you start talking about another, and it's like, man, your division handles
Yeah, the
a
scope.
lot.
Yeah, you're right. The scope is broad. I mean, I think it's 12 federal laws that protect workers, or approximately 12 that protect workers that wage and hour is responsible of enforcing. And it's really the totality of those that create this set of protections, this playing field, this level playing field that allows workers to be protected and hopefully prevents exploitation like
Mm,
labor trafficking.
yeah. What are some of those
The
protections that are
laws.
in place?
Yeah, I mean, so we've talked about several of them under guest worker programs.
Yeah.
Um, in addition to that, the minimum wages at the federal level of 7.25 per hour, that applies to all U.S. workers. Obviously, many states have stricter standards, and we always encourage employees and work and employers to connect with their state labor laws as well before coming up with pay practices. We enforce the Migrant Seasonal Protection Act, which really is the other principal law when we're looking at agriculture work. There's a promised wage rate. There's housing and transportation safety. There's a slew of requirements that associated with that agricultural protection law as well. The Family Medical Leave Act is 12 weeks of unpaid leave for qualifying reasons. If you get sick, you have a serious health condition, or somebody in your family has a serious health condition, you can take time off of work and ensure that your job is there when you return. We enforce prevailing wages in construction work. So if you're a worker in the trades and you're on a federally funded site, and you need to be paid a prevailing wage for the work that you're performing. Those are some of them. So that set is really what we talk about when we reference the overall workplace protections. There are other divisions within Department of Labor, like OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health, that handle safety and health related protections, and amongst several other divisions that handle benefits for employees. But those make up the protections that we're talking about here.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And even just for our audience, if anybody is wondering, how does this relate to trafficking, or why are we talking about workers' rights and what you guys are, what protections you guys are helping to hold up, these rights that workers have, and they are protective factors really against trafficking. And so when you guys are first of all, for workers to recognize what their rights are, but second, for you guys to enforce that and uphold these, and for employers, we recognize all of these as protective factors against trafficking, against labor trafficking for anyone. So
yeah, I think that's really important to know, Heather. One of the other pieces that we're focusing on is ensuring employees are free from retaliation, ensuring that they can assert their rights to these protections under federal law. And we're pursuing employers who are retaliating against employees aggressively, and we want to hear about that. So if you're a worker and you're experiencing that, or an advocate where you're hearing about that sort of behavior in the workplace, please let us know.
Jacob, I have a kind of a separate question. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I'm just really curious. How did you get into this field? What did you study in school, or just like what piqued your interest? How did you get into all this?
Yeah, that's a good question, Emily. I mean, I didn't go through school thinking I would, be in law enforcement or be an employee with the federal government. I really began my federal career through an internship I had in college. I went to Aquinas College. I got a business degree. Through that business degree, I had an internship with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and did some grant management. Took a job out in Oregon where that grant management, one of the components of that was ensuring that construction workers were paid a prevailing wage under the Davis-Bacon Act. And that was really the tie-in to wage and hour work. And wanted to come home to Michigan and to Grand Rapids, and found this role in the wage and hour division as an investigator. And, that led me here. It was foundational for me to have that investigative skill set. But I was really glad to move into my current role, where I'm working and being more proactive with stakeholders and folks and advocates and workers that want to know about their rights.
Mm-hmm. How cool is that?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you asking.
For sure. What are some of the most rewarding parts of your job?
I mean, connecting with organizations like yours that are interested in promoting workplace rights workers here in our country. Seeing employees and workers speak up, voice their concerns, that always warms my heart. Meeting employers that are interested in following the law and treating their employees well, which is the vast majority of my experience, and I think most people's in my office. But we're here for those instances in which that's not happening, so connecting with people, making relationships, and getting the word out that, workers in our country need to be protected and free from exploitation is really the message and what keeps me going every day. So, hey, I did want to quick touch back on Emily's question about how I got here and the roles within the Department of Labor. A shameless plug, I guess. I think the division and the department as a whole is doing a lot of hiring right now. I'd encourage folks to look on USA Jobs. We're looking for qualified candidates. We're always interested if you have a language capability. That makes you very attractive to the department. And so get on usajobs.gov. If you have questions about federal employment or work with a wage and hour division, call me directly, and I'm happy to have that conversation as well. But it's a good time to come on with the wage and hour division.
Yeah, if any of this conversation has sparked interest, you can work with Jacob.
Right.
I do, whenever I was actually just listening to a podcast the other day too, where they were talking about some different government jobs. And I feel like I usually think with a government job, you have to have some type of law enforcement degree. So I'm glad you asked that, Emily, because when I listened to that podcast, I was like, I wonder what Jacob's degree is in.
Yeah.
And it's I think it's like, oh, you don't have to have that type of a degree to be
the wage and hour division puts folks through basic training, so they invest heavily in employees, and really are just looking for core competencies that would make somebody a good fit, and not a JD or some specific degree. So it's important to know.
Nice. Yeah.
Cool. So what are some suggestions that you have to our listeners, to community members, about what any things that they can be doing to take action and to help in I guess specifically when we're talking about labor trafficking, but any violations or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, be a concerned citizen. Call us if you have questions about what federal law is or what labor law is in your locality, whether it's state law or not. We can connect you with, the folks that are subject matter experts in that field. Use me as counsel to talk about wage and hour law. Invite me to present or do trainings at your organization. If you are a worker, call us on our toll-free hotline, 1-866-4-US-WAGE. Call me directly. Talk about your concerns on the job. If you're an advocate, we take third-party complaints. As a worker, you don't have to speak English. We don't question you about your immigration status. So use us as a resource. We look over your payroll, no matter how complicated it is, talk about the wages that you're owed, provide technical expertise on that level as well. If you have, as an advocate, a potential victim of some wage exploitation or trafficking, call us and we'll talk about those working conditions that you're observing. And we'll connect you. If it's not a wage and hour resource, we'll connect you to agencies that can help. So I think that's the message. Know your local office, give us a call, and we can work through the issues that you're experiencing at work.
Wow, this is actually perfect timing of this episode. I was just having a conversation with someone yesterday. They started a new job and they've been working there for a few weeks and don't think that they've been getting paid what they were supposed to get paid. And she was thinking about quitting. I was like, no, don't quit. Like, you need to have a conversation with your manager first. But now having you as a resource in the back pocket, this is awesome. All right.
Yeah. Pass my information along.
And we can we'll link any of the things or numbers or websites or anything that you have mentioned to in the comments and show notes and everything.
Hannah, are you able to put the hotline number in across the screen or anything? Jacob, what is the hotline number?
So I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
1-866 the number 4 US wage. And then I'll also put my office line in the chat as well.
Great.
And my email. So we just have multiple forms of communication to stay in touch here.
Yep. Awesome.
Thanks so much, Jacob. This has been really informative. It's been a pleasure learning from you and hearing what you have to say today. You definitely do some exciting, important work. Are there any questions in the chat real quick before we start to close up today's episode?
Nope, there are no questions in the chat at this time, but if you do have any questions in the future, you can put them in the comments and we will answer them best that we can.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacob. And I hope that this can be inspirational to others, maybe in anti-trafficking work, as we think about having a more multidisciplinary approach when we look at human trafficking, that just realizing there are so many different organizations and people and players that are a part of prevention and enforcement, and also aftercare, supporting survivors. That I just really appreciate learning different angles and other ways that we can be working together and helping in addressing and preventing and with human trafficking. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for giving everyone the opportunity to hear about a different angle and a different way to look at human trafficking, and ways that ways that other people are working to prevent it. So thanks so much, Jacob.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you, Jacob, Emily, and Heather. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we appreciate your time and hope you found it helpful. And please share a cup of hope today.